Hey, welcome back to, well, not back. This is the first episode of POSTSCRIPT, which is one of our new shows on DNR Media, the Daily News Record podcast channel. Getting the band together again here a little bit. We're going to start this off. It's the same lineup as our Purple and Bold show, but Katie's going to help us get started on POSTSCRIPT, which is a story or a podcast where we're just going to talk to a Daily News Record reporter fairly regularly about a story that they've worked on, something they're pretty proud of, or that's particularly interesting going into the paper. So we're starting off with sports, just because we happen to be available here on this holiday week. But Katie has a in-depth feature on JMU running back Wayne Knight, who, if you're a JMU football fan, you know that he's having an incredible year, potential Sunbelt Player of the Year type of season for him. It's been a pretty long journey to get to that point. So we'll talk to Katie about why she decided to kind of dive in on Wayne, his history at JMU, how he almost left JMU, stuck around, his family, everything else. As she wrote a really good in-depth piece on a guy who quickly became one of the fan favorites here at Harrisonburg. So it's okay.
Yeah.
The first question is, why an in-depth feature on Wayne Knight right now as they get ready for stretch run of the football season?
Yeah, I think the big thing about Wayne Knight right now is that this really is the second year where he has proven himself to be a high-level running back, and it's truly the first season where he's had to take the bulk of the carries and be the number one guy for JMU. And being around this program now for a couple of years, I've heard the backstory for Wayne and him entering the transfer portal during his sophomore season. And, it was something he told me that was the hardest decision he's ever had to make. And so it was one of those stories that I thought was a really special one to tell when you see what he went through just 2 years ago and how he has pretty much turned it around. And like you said, he is in the running to be potentially the Sunbelt Offensive Player of the Year. And he's someone right now who's sitting, under 50 yards away from that 1,000-yard rushing mark on a season. So just has become a really, really special player for the Dukes, and one that I thought was fitting to help kind of tell his story.
Yeah, and this is, kind of a little bit of like How the Sausage Made type of podcast, as opposed to our other one, which I'm going to plug it right now, Purple and Bold, also on this same podcast feed. So check that out. We're going to talk JMU sports in depth week to week. But here we're just talking a little bit about the process, the journalism process of getting into the story. If anybody is interested in kind of how the things that get into the paper and online and the stuff we decide to work on and the kind of the passion projects as opposed to like our daily beat things. But when you're on a beat like a Division I sports beat like this, and we cover these teams, I think it is always kind of a little bit interesting, when you decide to break out from like that daily grind where, we get to this kind of a rhythm where it's a press conference on a Monday and then like some other interviews on a Tuesday, and you're banging out preview stories for each game and, maybe notebooks and things that like go along with the game coverage and things like that. But we always kind of want to, at some point during the season, really get in depth and like write about the people as much as the results. Why did you kind of choose now as the time to like really dive into Wayne, who we've discussed is like a really good story, but like, why was it now like the time to do it as opposed to like maybe focusing so much on the playoff push and things that are happening on the field?
Well, I love sports and I love writing game recaps, and I will happily write any game recap that's needed. But one of the reasons I always loved this field was because of those features where you're kind of taking people outside of just what they see on the football field every single game. And I was getting to a point this year where it was really kind of feeling like I hadn't had that chance to really sit down with someone yet one-on-one and have that in-depth conversation. I thought back to last year, and I had talked to DJ Barksdale, one of the nickels on JMU's roster, and that was in about mid-October last year. So I was sitting here, I'm like, wow, it's November. We're getting late in the season, and I haven't really done my part to kind of share the stories behind some of these guys on this year's roster. So that was one where I started to really think about it. And I'm like, who's a player that I know has a neat kind of path through this sport and neat off the field. And, when you're in journalism and you're in this field, you also think about like, who do I have that prior relationship with? So I know when I sit down with them, they're going to, open up and it will be a good dialogue. And Wayne is one of those guys. He's been in front of the media quite a bit already this season. And he was one that I knew that would have a good dialogue and would be open to sharing kind of his journey.
Yeah, and I think like one thing maybe a lot of people don't understand too about covering a high level Division 1 football team is how structured it is. And like I was saying, you get into that like day to day, like this is what happens on Monday, this is what happens on Tuesday, all the way through Saturday and game day. And like maybe more than any other sport, it can be hard to like line these up and get to like actually sit down in a room one-on-one with somebody and really let them tell their story. It's a press conference setting. Usually there's cameras and everything else around. And like, this is pretty like a special thing to do for a football team. It's a lot easier. Like, if I cover women's basketball in particular, they love the coverage. They'll make anybody available to you anytime. I can call Sean O'Regan on his phone anytime I want. It's not the same really with football. Is it?
Mm-mm. It's like you said, I think structured is a very good word for it. And we'll mention Chris Brooks here, the SID for football. I've known him since my sophomore year of college. So there is a really good level of trust there. So when I approach him to do a story like this, where I tell him, hey, I really want to sit down with Wayne, I don't necessarily want to do it over the phone. It's definitely something that I feel like he goes out of his way to make sure it can happen face to face. And for this story specifically, it did. It was after actually a press conference where Wayne was talking to everybody in the media, but then after everybody left, we sat down for probably about 15 minutes just to talk about football. But I think that's when you kind of get some of the best stories too, is when they're not surrounded by a lot of people looking at them and getting flooded with questions, but it almost becomes like a dialogue and a back and forth conversation where they get a little bit more comfortable. And it's not so much of like, making sure they're giving like the most correct, well thought out answer. And it's more just kind of what comes to mind for them.
Yeah. And I do think too, like, in my experience, when you interview somebody and like, they could tell that you're putting in some effort to be there, as opposed to just kind of showing up to the press conference. Like a lot of times you do get like better, more honest answers, things like that. Like I know even just like making a 2-hour drive to a basketball game is a completely different scenario post game than when it's inside the Atlantic Union Bank Center here in Harrisonburg and everybody's there and everything else. Like you just get different answers from people, and I think that kind of shows through in these kinds of stories too, where it's clearly been a one-on-one conversation where like, they let their guard down a little bit and everything is just so honest and open.
And I really do think that's like when the best stories come out, and you have to be mindful and kind of keep your eye out for these stories to pop up. But, when for both of us, you're around the basketball programs quite a bit. And I'm, the football team, I'm there at practice on a Tuesday. I'm there at press conferences on Mondays. I'm there on Saturdays. So you end up becoming a familiar face to them. And that's when I think you really can capitalize and make sure that they know that you're not just doing this just because, and it is something that genuinely interests you. I think that's also when you get those kind of really caring responses and moments where they want to, tell you something.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chris Brooks earlier too, who is the SID, that's the Sports Information Director at JMU, handles the football team and facilitates these kinds of things. And he's got a pretty tough job when it comes to this. As far as like I said, it's very structured generally with football. Football coaches also necessarily aren't always like as excited about getting the media because they know they're going to get it. They know you're going to be there on Saturday to cover their game regardless. So they're not always as like forthcoming with everything. So Chris has that kind of interesting job where, he couldn't do this for 115 guys on the roster and, 5 or 6 different reporters covering the team. Like he couldn't do this for everybody every day. So do you feel any kind of like extra weight or responsibility to like do a great job on a story like this when you do get the little bit extra access that you don't always get?
Yeah, I feel like I always put a little bit of pressure on myself to make it as good as I can. But I think a lot of that too is just because of how much I enjoy feature writing for my own personal side of it. Like I genuinely love this aspect of the job or these in-depth features. But yeah, like you said with Chris, like it's a balancing act, making sure that people are getting the people they want to talk to. And it's not always something that, like you said, is easy. And I think I kind of talked about it earlier. That's where that trust level comes in. I've put work into this, professional relationship to make sure that, they trust me. If he goes to the football team and asks, hey, Catie wants to talk with X, Y, and Z, that they're comfortable allowing those people to talk to me, because like I said, I've been there. They know who I am, and I am putting in that effort to, make sure that I'm giving the team the right kind of coverage and the correct coverage, and I'm doing it as professional as I can. But yeah, it's a hard job for Chris to balance all of that, but I definitely, try and make sure that the story that comes out of it is a good one. And I know I was at practice earlier today, and I know it's one that he's excited to read when it comes out later.
Yeah, and I know Chris is a little bit of the gatekeeper for the JMU players themselves. Obviously, for a story like this, you track down some other people, which I think makes this a good first episode, because that process was a little bit different than normal for you. It's kind of a funny story. Tell us about trying to get in touch with some of the people in Wayne's family and other people who can just kind of tell you a little bit about him.
Yeah, obviously JMU fans know Wayne was not the only Knight to play at JMU, and that his little brother Yamir was here last year and the year before. And I really wanted to talk to Yamir about Wayne, because it's a very close family. Wayne calls him, that's little bro. I think Yamir, consistently says that's big bro. Like, they're very close. They've played together. And I wanted to talk to Yamir. So I reached out to SMU, which is where he is playing now, and didn't hear back at first. And that's one of those you just kind of have to sit and wait on. I still hadn't heard back 2 days later. So I sent a follow-up email saying, hi, explained the situation, told them that wasn't interested in talking to Yamir about him leaving JMU. This was all about his brother. I was trying to make sure I was structured it as well as I could to try and get that yes, and got an interesting response within 5 minutes saying that, this is what blah, blah, blah talked to him about, or blah, blah, blah talked to Yamir about this today, about this like very same story. And I'm sitting there and I was like, why is someone who covers SMU asking about Wayne Knight? So it was one of those that I was like, this is a little weird, but okay. And so I was just like, this isn't, I guess, the right avenue to go down anymore. And the story ended up coming out on Saturday, and it was a story just about Yamir Knight. So I was like, okay, not exactly what I wanted to do, because they actually told me to reach out to that reporter and ask him, which, I don't know. When you're a reporter, you pride yourself on your own interviews. Like, you don't want to get quotes from someone else. Like, you want, at least for me, like, I want to be the one having that conversation and getting what I need out of it and making sure that there's a comfort level there. So had to go down a different avenue. But when you have a good relationship with people in this field, you're able to find different ways to get in contact with someone. So I did eventually track down Yamir Knight's phone number, and that will be a nice little addition to this feature that will come out.
Yeah, two things about that is, like you mentioned before, you kind of like, that's the payoff from developing these relationships over the course of like a couple of years and being on the beat for a while, is like you can find a different way to get in touch with somebody if you absolutely have to. And secondly, I just find it hilarious that like he was basically asking you to like call another reporter to like ask for quotes or ask what questions he asked. I don't know exactly what he was wanting you to do with that information. But like, it would be, as a reporter myself, it would be so weird if I had gotten that call from somebody being like, hey, your SID told me to call you because you're interviewing somebody I want to interview. And I would not know what to do with that information.
Yeah, it was a weird one, because I think we all pride ourselves on doing our own work. And I just felt like asking another reporter for their work is just kind of the easy way out. So I wanted to make sure that, and I knew when you have a reporter that's covering a different team, you're coming at it from a different angle. Like, you're not, so in that case, they had, the story mentioned Yamir's family, him growing up and playing football, but it wasn't coming at it from the angle of Wayne's story and what Wayne went through at JMU to get to where he is now. So it was one of those where I was pretty firm in my beliefs that it was important to get Yamir's angle and seeing what his big brother went through to seeing him now.
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm definitely excited to see this story hit print. People can look for it on, newsstands and stuff. If you're around Harrisonburg here for Thanksgiving, pick it up, or if you have a subscription, be online to hear. Maybe by the time this gets posted, I'm not sure when it's actually hitting the website, but we'll attach the podcast and the story together so everybody can kind of check out the whole package, get an idea how this story on Wayne Knight came together. Um, this has been POSTSCRIPT. It's a new show for part of our podcast network here at DNR Media, where we're going to do this every once in a while. Just kind of like spend a few minutes talking about how a story came together. So if you're at all interested in that kind of journalism aspect of it, it won't always be sports. In fact, most of the time it probably won't be. But this was a good one to get started with. And thanks, Catie, for hopping on.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Thanks.